Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Community of Christ historian John Hamer. He's also a 70 in their church. We're going to be talking about the competition between the Hedrickites and the Josephites with their temples. Is the Auditorium a temple? John makes the surprising claim that it is. We'll also talk about Strangite temples and Cutlerite temples. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out.
And he's the one who has the vision for creating the auditorium, which is like our conference center.
Right.
And so it's this vast thing. It's not as big as the conference center, but by the way, it's way bigger than the tabernacle. And you only built the conference center much more recently than this. So this was being built in the 20s, and it could have fit more people than lived in Independence.
Oh, it's that old?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was Truman when that was finished.
Yeah, well, it wasn't finished.
Oh,
it started to be built.
In the 20s.
It started to be built in like 1929, okay. And I don't know if you remember what might have happened in the United States history right around that time. Yeah, so we went into all of this debt, and we start building this building, and then suddenly everything crashed, and so then there's this depression, and so then the church is.
The temple lot was building their temple at the same time.
Yeah, and that actually proves. Something that almost nobody in Community of Christ knows.
We haven't talked about the Hedrickites.
Yeah. So the auditorium, this thing that I'm talking about, is built on the greater temple lot in Independence, Missouri, right? So this idea, it's built at the center of the city of Zion, the center place, of the New Jerusalem according to the Doctrine and Covenants, right? And so the vision that Fred M. Smith has is, I think, to build now the temple in the center of the New Jerusalem, the city of Zion, on the greater temple lot. And the reason why, even though he doesn't call it a temple, he's a modern guy. He wants to make everything, using modern terms. So he calls it the auditorium. But it is built on the same model of what the reorganization understands temples to be, which is it is a space for conferences and worship. It is a space for training and learning. It is a space with offices for church headquarters. And the reason why, and it is very similar to a vision that Joseph III had about what the temple would look like if it was going to be built in Independence, when they actually build it. And the reason why I actually say it actually is the temple for the reorganization is because of the Hedrickite experience. And so the Hedrickites, people in Gospel Tangents, your audience, are probably aware of as the Temple Lot Church. So the Church of Christ Temple Lot.
I'm hoping to get somebody on this fall. We'll see if it happens.
Well, that'll be super cool.
Yeah.
So they're one of these other expressions of the movement when I was talking about Brighamites, Josephites, Bickertonites, Strangites, Cutlerites, and then Hedrickites, right?
Mm-hmm.
Otherites included like Whiteites and Whitmerites, but they're extinct.
Right.
And so the Hedrickites reorganize themselves at the same time as the reorganization is first happening. That is to say, when Jason Briggs.
In the 1850s?
Yeah, in the 1850s. And they're in fact actually part of early reorganization conferences. But they end up deciding they don't agree with some of the ways that, Jason Briggs and Zenas Gurley are going. And they also have, what's the last, like one of the last apostles to get ordained, it's not a mass alignment. It's like, anyway, some Nauvoo apostle, kind of a lesser apostle that didn't go off to the West, and he's hanging out with them. And so he convinces them, they to reorganize and have their own apostles and things like that. And so then Granville Hedrick gets revelation that they need to go back to reclaim Zion, Jackson County. And so they are the first group to go back.
Right.
And so they know where the parcel is, the greater temple lot. Everybody is confused about the temple lot. They think of this little part that the temple lot church owns as the temple lot.
Yeah.
But in fact, there is a much bigger parcel that Edward Partridge had bought as presiding bishop of the church. And this is this property in the Revelation.
There were supposed to be 24 temples, not one temple.
That's right. Exactly. And so the temple lot church folks as a matter of faith, believe that they dug things up and found stones, and they think that they have the cornerstones for where the where the one that was actually going to be dedicated,
which we haven't talked about. But
anyway, no. They thought that they found auto-fetting is the one that did that.
Yeah.
But anyway, but they feel like they found that as a evidence that that's the spot that the one that was going to have been dedicated in the 1830s by Joseph Smith when they first started to do it.
Is that not true? Are you saying?
I'm not sure that has been authenticated. That those are that those cornerstones that are actually that actually dates to the 1830s. So I always think of that as the traditional spot. I don't know. Maybe I would have to. I haven't read that anywhere in an actual dialogue or Mormon History Association where they've actually authenticated any of that. That's a tradition that came from the 20s.
Probably from Fetting.
From Fetting. So where did Fetting come from? So this is why it's very interesting. So they are absolutely are one of the 1844 tradition churches. So it's the Hedrickites and all of those guys, and they went back and they had their own group, and they're not part of the reorganization or anything like that. But by the time you get around to the 1920s, they are on their last legs. So there's they haven't been calling apostles. They have maybe like kind of one guy that maybe had been from a group of apostles. They've got a little tiny congregation that's left, a couple hundred people or something like that, and they have no real active, not much in the way of active leadership. And the RLDS Church has been doing everything in its power to get this property from them. And the RLDS Church has bought all the property around them, except for this part that the LDS Church ends up getting to buy. And
on the south side.
so the temple parcel, a key spot is owned by the Church of Christ Temple lot, and that's the part that is like one of the traditional temples goes there. But like you say, there's supposed to be 24 temples. The Community of Christ owns the place where the Community of Christ Temple is and the Auditorium is, and the LDS Church owns the part where the LDS Visitor Center is. That is all on the temple lot. So all of those churches own temple lot property. And then there's a little part that the railroad owns that cuts across it. So like the railroad, railroads can trump everything, right?
Exactly.
Back in that time anyway.
Yeah.
So the RLDS Church has done everything by hook or by crook to try to steal, beg, borrow, trick these poor temple lots, sue them. It's just rotten behavior.
Yeah.
I can say in retrospect, bad sportsmanship by RLDS people to try to a strong arm this very, nice independent church that has had its own tradition. And by the way, we're the first ones that got back there. So guess what? They right of priority, right? Anyway, so they've done their god awful best to steal this land from them. But so the trick that the RLDS Church has come up with after they lost the suit is we will come into free association with the Temple Lot Church. So in other words, we'll recognize each other's priesthood.
Right.
We'll recognize each other's baptisms. We will allow people to transfer their memberships back and forth between the Temple Lot Church and the RLDS Church. And the RLDS Church, because the Temple Lot doesn't have a headquarters structure or organized apostles
and it's a tiny
things like
building.
that, and it's super tiny, they essentially are being made into a branch. And if we just kind of wait them out for a second, according to the sneaky, ultimately backfiring plan of the RLDS leaders, we'll trick them into just becoming a branch of the organization, and we will get this land that we've been trying to steal and trick and sue out of them all this time. But then supreme directional control happens. And so it's not just the presiding bishopric that is mad and resigns. 1,000 RLDS members walk across the street. They transfer their memberships from the RLDS Church, including auto-fetting, and they all join now the Church of Christ Temple Lot. So now the Church of Christ Temple Lot, for all intents and purposes, even though it does have its own legitimate tradition, it now becomes an RLDS dissenting group. And so that RLDS dissenting group immediately reorganizes the Church of Christ Temple Lot. And so now they do call 12 apostles, 11 of whom are ex-RLDS members. There's the one old Temple Lot guy, who's there, and he dies pretty soon, I think. And one of those is Fetting. And auto-Fetting starts having revelations. The revelations include, we need to start building this temple. And so then they start building a temple, and they have a whole design for the temple. And what is the temple going to be like? It's going to be an auditorium. It's going to have like a big auditorium structure, just like the auditorium that the RLDS Church is building. And it's going to...
is it like Kirtland or more like the auditorium?
functionally it's like the auditorium. It looks kind of like a bank. So it looks like kind of a Greek, thing on the front, and it's a structure, but functionally it has like the auditorium. It has like, it's like Kirtland in the sense that the auditorium is like Kirtland, which is to say it has a big auditorium, like the main assembly hall in the Kirtland Temple, and it has a second one underneath,
So it's like Kirtland in that sense.
like Kirtland in that sense, like the auditorium, because the Community of Christ Auditorium has a basement auditorium too underneath it.
Right.
And so both of them are like that, and it also has places for offices and so forth. So in other words, these ex-RLDS members who have just left a church where it's just building an auditorium understand what the temple to be is to be just like the auditorium.
Oh.
And so this is why I'm saying that, in fact,
that's why they were competing buildings at the time.
Yeah, although they never got past building the whole.
Right.
So they drew up architectural plans because they end up.
But they found the cornerstones.
Yeah, they did find cornerstones. I don't know how. I have not heard how authenticated that situation is, right? Because Fetting is doing other things that, potentially discredit him, including in the eyes of the Temple Lot Church, which excommunicates Fetting over time.
Right.
And so Fetting, and that's why we say Hedrickites. There's a lot of Hedrickite churches, including, Fettingite churches, the Churches of Christ with the Elijah message and so on. And so there's dozens of different Hedrickite churches. Not
dozens?
Yeah.
I only thought there was 3. That's interesting. Okay.
No, there's lots. I mean, the wildest one, there's 2 wildest ones. So in 2 different extremes of the direction that the Hedrickites go. So the one of them kind of slowly gets away from restoration distinctives and slowly becomes like Anglo-Aryan and becomes kind of a neo-Nazi church.
Oh, no.
And on the other extreme, is one that is led by a woman named Pauline Hancock, an ex-RLDS member, and it's informally called the Basement Church. And Pauline Hancock became the very first woman to lead a restoration denomination, a Hedrickite denomination in this case. And it's her church that Gerald and Sandra Tanner.
I know. I just talked to Sandra.
Yeah.
And I said, we need to talk about Pauline Hancock.
Yeah. And that's also as a church that became more and more, they were very interested in it, like the Tanners are in the actual like documents and history. And that's one of the reasons why they had that overlap in association, and they were studying a Book of Mormon study group, and they ultimately decided that they couldn't support Book of Mormon historicity. They therefore rejected it. So the church voted again, and more and more to kind of, well, we don't agree with these distinctives anymore because we've studied them and we don't think that they have, ancient historicity and that kind of a thing. And they ultimately vote themselves out of existence. So yeah, that's, so on the one hand, you can go kind of like the way liberal progressive route, and you can also go neo-Nazi out of the same tradition. So different things could be born.
I didn't know about the neo-Nazi thing.
Yeah. So yeah, Jason Smith, you should interview, because.
Is that what he is? Or was?
No. Please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disparage Jason. No, Jason I was mentioning as like the guy I was hanging out with David Howlett in that 2000. Yeah. So he's
I know Jason.
Yeah, he's Community of Christ. He was an evangelical before, I think, or at least a Protestant.
Oh, I thought you were saying he was a
No, I'm saying he's the person who studies Hedrickites. He's like one of these guys who's one of the experts on the Hedrickites.
Oh, okay.
And so he wrote the article, or one of the articles on that for Scattering of the Saints.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah. That's all I'm saying. So no, I just want to definitely make it clear, I'm not saying that Jason R. Smith is or has ever been a neo-Nazi.
Jason's a good guy.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right. So,
okay, I don't even. That was a big tangent. What were we talking about?
So we were doing the auditorium and the temple lot.
Oh yeah.
Depression hits, temple lot.
So if we already built a temple, the auditorium, if we already built that, why on earth do we then build another temple? And it's because, in my opinion, it's because Fred M. Smith never really told everybody that it was the temple, and so it was finished under his brother Israel A. Smith, who might have had the same kind of vision as him, because Israel A., who had been in that presiding bishopric, he ultimately reconciled with his brother and ended up being his brother's successor, and so he's the prophet into the 50s and 60s.
So Fred, when he died, did he
yes, and so
Israel, or did he?
Yeah, he did. So
he did.
He did. So so he had appointed his brother Israel A. Smith, and Israel A. Smith died in a car accident, but he'd put it in his will that he'd appointed his brother, W. Wallace Smith. So this is by appointment. And
so 3 of Joseph Smith III's children
yes.
were the next 3 prophets.
Yes. And the reason why it could happen is Joseph III had a long, long life, and he was
3 wives.
Yeah, in succession, right?
Yes. Now he was a polygamist.
Right. And so what ended up happening was, so late in life, after he had been a widower twice over, came to Toronto for a great conference, and he met, one of the members of the congregation there. And so his 3rd wife, a Canadian wife, ended up having then, he had a whole new kids with, so in other words, these are
she was a lot younger than him.
A lot younger, so it was kind of scandalous. And so therefore, though, you can imagine why this younger brother, W. Wallace Smith, is like way younger than the oldest brother, Fred M. It's like a generation apart. So It's like my family. My mom is the oldest by far in her family because she's born like during World War II, and then the others, there's like a little bit of a break, and so anyway, she has 9 younger brothers. The youngest 2 of my uncles are my age, right? And so this is the same kind of thing. So essentially, W. Wallace Smith is almost like a son age for Fred M. Right. And so that's why they're able to all be just sons of Joseph III. So all the way up until the 70s, there is a grandson, no greats at all, a grandson of Joseph Smith as the prophet, of Community of Christ. But W. Wallace, as being in this kind of 3rd family or, youngest family, had not been central to church rule, the church leadership. He had been dentist, maybe dentist. Anyway, he'd been off living in the Pacific West. He'd had a professional career before this, and he was not trained in any of these things. And so he's the one, when he becomes, when he's appointed successor by Israel A. after Israel A. dies in a car accident, in sort of an unexpected and untrained, FM is like raised to be the king, right? But W. Wallace wasn't, and so W. Wallace is also, not a great thinker, not much in the way of a visionary leader. He's surrounded by able apostles and things like that are kind of running the show. I feel like that's at least what everybody always says. And so he's the one whose revelations start talking about the need to build a temple. And so I think that, again, he doesn't have, there's no institutional memory that maybe we already have a temple. And that's one of the reasons why then we build another whole temple that is almost the same as the one we already had, and now we have this giant headquarters complex that has no use, except for once every 3 years and things like that. So there we are.
And that's the spiral temple.
Yeah, I love it. It's the most magnificent. I think it's the most.
It's a beautiful building.
It's beautiful.
And I have to tell you, John. So I teach college algebra.
Yeah.
And we talk about the Fibonacci sequence, which I won't bore everybody with the math. Yeah. But the spiral on the Community of Christ Temple is a Fibonacci sequence. And so whenever I teach Fibonacci sequences, I'm like, and look at this temple.
Yeah.
So my students learn all about the Community of Christ Temple.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be kind of a seashell thing, and it's a Fibonacci sequence. So
yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think the Fibonacci component of it is much more important than the seashell part of it, or whatever. Just to say that this idea of everything from like the golden mean and this kind of divine
ratio,
ratio. These kind of divine senses that are rooted in going all the way back to a Greek civilization, Western civilization, and trying to have that kind of an expression of connecting, of a sacred place, a place where God's presence is manifest on earth. That's connecting all of us, in our identity to the divine, and really. So I was, as you know, I was, like I said at the beginning of this, I was a Mormon kid. But I left before I went on a mission. So my experience is not inside part of the temple. I did some baptisms for the dead when I was a teenager, but generally speaking, I liked it from the outside. In other words, that was my experience of it. And I always hated going to church. And, I'm a historian. I love architecture. I want to be an architect too. I have all these friends who have these incredible churches, but we consoled ourselves because the temples were gorgeous, right? Because I'm going to church in this thing of cinder block building that has orange carpet, and I'm just like, oh, I mean, this is not inspiring to me. And so that idea, that component of it, like of building and structures, that was always like critical to like what energized me, or what I was spiritually connected to as a kid. And it's that, along with the idea of building a utopia, so making Far West, making Nauvoo, trying to. So I had just an incredible experience as a 13-year-old visiting Nauvoo and that kind of a thing. That tried to that's one of the things that tried to keep that heritage component was what I was kind of focusing on to try to kind of keep me into the movement, which wasn't ultimately enough, as a kid, that I left. But anyway,
you came back. You're
I came back.
Community of Christ, so
no, I know. But anyway, but I wandered in the meantime and went on other ways. In other words, trying to have that focus was the thing that I was saying. Well, I don't like this and that and the other thing, but I do like this component. And so I'm just saying, highlighting that component of it. And so when I first saw I had met Community of Christ people for the very first time at the Kirtland Temple, and when I first, and I'd like, oh, this is interesting, and I hadn't known anything about it. I'd had the same thing growing up, LDS, dismissing the RLDS, kind of out of hand without really having any experience with it or knowledge about it. And at the time when I first then was kind of looking at it, and I saw the pictures of the Community of Christ Temple. Community of Christ is so bad at publicity and getting everything. There was like no pictures. I had like this one little low resolution image of this thing, on the primitive internet at the time. And so I was like, I've got to go there and see this. And I just for me, it's inspiring of all of the different things that Community of Christ RLDS tradition has always been tiny and poor and has more vision than it ever is able to accomplish. So that auditorium took a long time to build, but the temple is done so well, and it just is unlike everything else in that it's just gorgeous, and I love it. Yeah. And so it's central to, anyway, my identity in the church is one of the things that drew me into the church. So this is one of the things that makes me so sad right now. But anyway, so I love that, that temple is the expression.
Okay.
So anyway, but nevertheless, I think now, in retrospect, W. Wallace Smith, built it without an idea what it is, when in fact we already had, the Community of Christ, the RLDS version of a temple was already in existence when he started thinking about it. And so then he becomes the first president of the church to retire to emeritus status. He again appoints a successor. That's the main pillar of legitimacy that the church understands it. And he happens to appoint his son. And so that's the one that people are also aware of, that Royal Smith line.
Wallace B.
And that becomes Wallace B. Smith. And Wallace B. then, following up on his father's announcements that the time is coming to build the temple, in the revelation that announced the end of priesthood discrimination on the basis of gender, he also said, and it's time that we're going to build the temple. And so it's under Wallace
B. that women are allowed to have the priesthood in the Community of Christ.
Yeah. And by the way, here's the thing. I hate the formulation, like, we let women have the priesthood, or we let blacks have the priesthood. That is not, so you cease discrimination in priesthood on the basis of race. So, there is the formulation where you're saying letting women have it is still patriarchal and discriminatory.
Okay.
So the church was in a condition of sin. We repented of this kind of discrimination, and now there is not discrimination on the basis of gender in terms of ordination.
Okay.
So that
no, that's good. Thanks for correcting me. I appreciate that.
So yes, that happened under Wallace B. Smith, and that caused
schism.
So that's where we get these, the restorationists, like we've been talking about, right? So in other words, the people who decided, therefore, that the church headquarters apparatus is in disarray, and so they went back to the old model. We will just meet in branches, and our branches will not recognize the headquarters in the same way that all these branches were not recognizing Brigham Young's headquarters or Sidney Rigdon's headquarters, and we'll wait for someone of Joseph's seed to emerge. And so in the case of some of these branches, when Fred Larson, who you know, knew, felt that call and he came forward.
Around the year 2000, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Then he was able to bring many of the branches into what became then the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which was one of the first kind of major organizations for the Restorationists, but it wasn't the biggest one. The biggest ones being the independent branches that are organizing
JCRB,
under
Joint Conference of Restoration Branches.
Yeah. So anyway, that's that stuff.
So one of the things that I love when I remember the first time I went to Independence, and I was just driving around, and I'm like, that's the Restoration Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's the Restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's the Everlasting Church of Jesus Christ. And I was just like, there are so many Mormon churches here.
There are. It's crazy. So so that's why you know, like, I don't know, there's like the East Gudgel Street Hedrickite Church. You know, do you know what I mean? And there's all of these different, these different variants. And,
the Cutlerite Church was
Cutlerites
right down right from the temple.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so,
which is also an endowment house.
Yeah.
Or a temple, as you like to call it.
I like it. I tell everybody it's a temple. That's LDS lingo.
Yeah.
So and they've only got like 9 people left.
Yeah.
And their president prophet just died
a couple years ago.
And so, do you know it's Lane?
Yeah, I have known. So I haven't been in touch with them since before that. So I mean, I've visited them before, but haven't recently. So yeah.
Because I've talked to them a couple of times. Virginia, his wife, I can't remember his name for some reason.
Yeah.
She gave me a tour of their little church, which I was
they're so nice.
Out bad.
Yeah. Yeah, they're wonderful.
Of course, I couldn't go upstairs.
Of course not. It's sacred, not secret. It's sacred.
Yeah, and with COVID,
yes.
I mean, I think of those 9 members, I think 7 of them are over the age of 70.
Yeah. So it's like Virginia's sons are the ones, right, that are the future of the whole thing. I just went there this year because it used to say they meet at 11 o'clock every Sunday or something. They covered that. They took that off,
because they're only meeting once or twice a month now.
Okay, yeah.
Because COVID really did a number on them.
Yeah, lots of churches.
And, they didn't want to die.
Yeah, yeah. So. Well, I would say about the Cutlerites, there's more Mormon scholars camped out around the Cutlerite church than there are Cutlerites,
But yeah, so just really quickly, so they practice an endowment.
That's right.
They're one of the only non-Brighamite churches.
They're the only non-Brighamite church
to practice an endowment, and they do sealings.
Yep.
Although I found out Strangites do sealings, but they don't have a temple. How that works.
So and the Strangites were the last church to practice sealings into noble households. So this is something,
the law of adoption kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was still happening up through the 50s.
Oh, really?
I think. And so the Strangites were the last church to be doing that. And they also, they technically don't have polygamy off the books, but they believe
polygamy is a godly principle, but they don't practice it
because they need a prophet to do that.
Exactly.
And they are very clear because James Strang in his succession claim made it very clear in terms of legitimacy. It's completely impossible for Brigham Young to be a prophet of this church because, as we all know, if your ward, if all of the high priests were to die off and all the elders, you can't just ask, the deacons quorum to ordain somebody to be a new elder, because the lesser cannot ordain the greater. Right. And so therefore, since the prophet is above apostles can't ordain anybody to be a prophet. And so, as James Strang said, the only way that this is going to work out is either the prophet has to do it, which he claims that he got, through a letter of appointment. And then he also...
I was going to say angelic ordination, because he's kind of got 2 claims.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think the more important one is the angelic ordination.
Yeah,
I do too. But they make a big deal about the appointment part. But I think that they should emphasize the angelic.
Oh, I do too. I do too.
Anyway, that's neither here nor there. People can
Yeah.
make their own apologetic claims. So, but anyway, my point is that that's why they're waiting, right? And so until because nobody's around to write another letter or any other thing, the only operative way to get a new prophet in the Strangite tradition is for an angel to come.
Right. Right.
And until you have a prophet, you don't have anybody to do plural marriages or
baptisms for the dead.
Baptisms for the dead.
Because they still believe in them, but they don't practice it.
Well, you have to have authorization to do it outside of temple. So they used to do it when Strang was there, they did it in the White River
right.
there in Voree. But because they got special authorization, the same way that they did that in the river in Nauvoo too.
Right.
But they did, you have to have the rules. They're very rule focused, the Strangites. So they're amazing in terms of that stuff. So it's not just, so for them, what's important, because they don't have a living prophet, what's important is everything that was published in the lifetime of the prophets. And they have two prophets, because James Strang produced every bit as much as Joseph Smith. And so they are fully a Mormon tradition church, but it's Mormon plus, because it has a fully realized Mormon content that is like, you realize if you're bringing about, you realize, wow, these guys were really active of making new stuff. And so every single thing, that means if you can find something in the Messenger and Advocate,
right?
If you can find something in the Times and Season, if you can find something in the Northern Ireland of Beaver Island, then that is operative law for the church. And in the Strangite tradition, all of the women are ordained to the priesthood office of teacher, and most of the men are high priests. Younger ones are different priesthood offices sometimes, but men, generally speaking. But teacher becomes like a really important office in the Strangite church priesthood office, because it's teachers who go through all of that text to find, and are able to then teach from that to find the operating rules for the church, and then teach it to the church. And so it was actually kind of so you know them from being in Voree. They weren't all in Voree, so they had the church had been kind of established in branches. Like the main branches were like in things like in Colorado and New Mexico and Texas and things like that. But three women of the church, going through all of their understanding of how the law works,
Wingfield Watson's daughters,
were able to see Kirtland. The stake of Kirtland as a gathering place had been desecrated for X, Y, or Z reason. Nauvoo had been desecrated for X, Y. Far West had been Independence. In other words, all the gathering places, Beaver Island, they'd all been desecrated, and so they were no longer operative of gathering. But it turns out that Voree, which had been Strang's original headquarters, nothing had ever happened to make it not be operative. And so once they decided that, then they all gathered there, and so it had a huge effect on the history of the church. And so there is like a room for, the lived experience of ordained women in the Strangite church to have a big leadership effect.
Yeah. And they even allow women teachers to lead meetings.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah. Very cool. Well, cool. All right. So Wallace B just died like a year ago, right?
Yeah.
He was 100 years old, I think.
Yeah. So he's emeritus prophet of the church. It's amazing that the great-grandson, just one great of Joseph Smith, was still alive as the emeritus prophet up until, like you said, 2 years ago.
I'm trying to remember, when did he retire? Do you remember?
It's like 96 or something like that. So he... again, we don't, like I said, the leaders have always made the case that it's about who they appoint. And so he said, as prophet, God is calling non-Smiths, to lead the church. And he called W. Grant McMurray, who had been, he had originally been Richard Howard's assistant in the historians department.
Right.
And so when I always say that Richard Howard is our version of Leonard Harrington, Grant McMurray, who was Richard Howard's assistant, is like our Mike Quinn, who was Leonard Harrington's assistant. And so it's like having Mike Quinn become the president of your church, right? And so Grant McMurray...
Well, he was supposed to be an apostle, right?
Well, he was, yeah, absolutely.
Mike Quinn, yeah.
and yeah, and it would have been a different history if Mike Quinn had been able to be prophet of the LDS Church. That's for sure.
Now, well, I want to address this. This is something that LDS say, and I think there's some truth to it, but I don't know how much truth there is to it. Because Wallace didn't have any sons, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of LDS people will say, well, the reason why they ordained women is because Wallace didn't have any sons.
Yeah. So that's not the case. That's not why. One thing that he didn't appoint any daughters to be his successor. I mean, so you'd think if that was the whole excuse, you would have done that. So we've already seen in the royal Smith line that it hasn't gone father, son, father, son, father, son, has it? It went father, son, brother, father, son. So there's plenty of Smiths in Community of Christ. And so we don't, so if we needed it to be a Smith, so
we could have found one.
Fred M. Smith only had daughters too. So I was mentioning how Fred M. Smith has two daughters. It's the Edwards line, and it's the Larson line. And so, when Fred Larson emerged as the prophet of the remnant church, he is, he's the grandson of F.M. Smith through the second daughter, right? The Larson line. That's why his name is Larson, not Smith. He's still a Smith, same thing. And that Larson line is also produced. So his sister, her son is Locke. Locke is a Smith. We have plenty of Smiths. We know, like, a person who Jan Ships just felt Paul Edwards should have been the prophet. And so, I was talking to you about how Paul Edwards is this great intellectual. He'd been one of the leaders of the Temple School. He'd been a professor at Graceland, one of these, very serious and important thinkers. And a lot of the books that are from the 60s and 70s and things like that. So his father, F. Henry Edwards, had been like in the first presidency as one of the major thinkers in the middle 20th century. And he was again married to F.M. Smith's eldest daughter. And so Paul Edwards as a Smith could easily have been, if we needed a Smith, he could easily have been the successor, So there's no problem, and if you need, there's no reason. Nobody ever said that it had to be like France where it's the male line only. But if we had to do male line only, there's people who are named Smith, because it's not, we didn't run out of any of those either, because Joseph Smith III has a whole bunch of brothers, and so there's Alexander Smith, there's Frederick, Frederick Madison Smith, there's David Hiram Smith, and they all have, there's like all kinds of Smiths. Anybody who's worried that anybody's out of Smiths, we're not out of Smiths. So we got plenty. So no, what he's saying is,
but it wasn't a royal Smith.
They are all royal Smiths.
I guess it's true. That's right.
I mean, if Joseph Fielding Smith Jr. is a royal Smith, I mean, he's not even, you had to even go all the way back to Hiram to get to him, right?
Yeah,
so he was royal, George Albert Smith. You have to go all the way back to Joseph Smith Sr.'s brother to get down to him, and he's a royal Smith, right?
Okay.
So no, I mean, yes, I know that's what that's what LDS people said, and actually there was also a huge myth that the RLDS Church had run out of Smiths, and that's why Joseph Fielding Smith was going to have to be made. He was going to have to be made president of both the LDS Church and the RLDS Church. And that was such a great story that after he died and Spencer W. Kimball was the president of the church when I was growing up, people were saying, I heard it that the RLDS Church was running out of Smiths, and so Spencer W. Kimball was the next nearest relative, and he was going to be it. There was people had even lost control of the details of this story, and they were telling the story in a way that it made no sense anymore. So I appreciate that has been an LDS lore thing, but that is a total myth. Okay. The reality is that it was at a certain point deemed to be an embarrassment that there's like a monarchy this way with this family, when there are all kinds of potentially incredible, dynamic spiritual leaders, and that we could be drawn from. And so as a a modern progressive person. Now we have really gotten with Wallace B. Smith. Now we've gotten to a progressive leader as opposed to F.M. Smith, who was pretty conservative.
Okay.
So that's where now we are into him as a very progressive leader, and so therefore thinks that this is archaic, I think. And so he calls W. Grant McMurray. He appoints him, and that has literally been, though, that from Joseph III's time, they have all made it very clear that their power to appoint is the way that legitimacy happens. It has seemed like it's been all Smith's, because it has been, and that is drawing upon this thing, like I said, that William Smith popularized, and it certainly is the shorthand that people outside the RLDS Church, the LDS people, see it as, but there was not. It is two pillars of legitimacy, and I agree that having a Smith caused legitimacy, and I actually believe that when Grant became the president and prophet, people viewed him differently. So I experienced this. People treated Wallace B. Smith with more reverence, So he was just treated with like an incredible amount of reverence. And Community of Christ, where people are supposed to be more casual with their leaders, and I actually, very early on, as I met Community of Christ people, and I had my regular LDS kind of deference, and they're like, "Don't be like that. That's just an apostles are just regular people like you and me. You don't have And so, but I do think that there is something truth to the fact that there were two pillars of legitimacy, because there had been so much tradition of having a Smith monarch. Nevertheless, the operative thing in terms of the organizational structure was appointment, and so there are these two pillars of legitimacy upon which the prophetic monarchy was resting in the RLDS tradition.
Okay.
But now we have Grant, who only has one of those. So Grant only had the one because he's not a Smith
anymore.
And then he abruptly resigns in 2004. No personal reasons, doesn't say why, and declines to appoint a successor. So now
what are we going to do?
You can see a problem. So we've already gotten rid of Smiths, and now we got rid of the chain of appointments broken. And so one of the things you might say, well, Wallace B. Smith is still the emeritus prophet. He could just pick somebody else, right, and appoint that, and that would just, because that would be seemingly like just as good, right? But he declines to do that. And so what has happened in the meantime, though, so Grant has been prophet of the church, and he has brought several documents of inspired counsel that have been brought before the World Conference and have been canonized as sections of the Doctrine and Covenants. And one of these, Doctrine and Covenant, these are actually the most poetic ones. So he's actually changing, he's understanding what the Doctrine and Covenants is actually for in a lived way. And so now he's actually brought just really amazing scripture into the canon. And so I really think that's something that is a legacy that Grant has given the church. There had been a little of that before, but it becomes pretty remarkable in his pieces. But in D&C 162, he talks about the church as being called to be a prophetic people, not just a people with a prophet. And so this is giving us a new source of legitimacy, a way forward that is beyond Smith family monarchy. It's beyond this fixed chain of succession that has no oversight. Instead, everybody in the church is being called upon to act as a prophet, to pray to God. Who is God calling to lead the church? I mean, this kind of comes all the way back to the beginning when everybody in Joseph Smith's community is sitting around in a circle with their own seer stones and stuff, right? In other words, so that we're all called to, receive individual revelation, but it's operative in our own families or whatever that would be in how the LDS tradition understands it. But in this case, we, and in the RLDS tradition, there's precedent for this because, for example, in congregations, it isn't an appointment from the first presidency who appoints a regional authority, who appoints a stake presidency, who appoints a bishop or something like that. The congregation itself discerns each year who they want to have set apart to be the pastor of the congregation. So who's going to be the branch president? It's the congregation that decides, not external,
not the
authority.
first presidency.
It's not the first presidency. So I'm the pastor of the Toronto congregation. I'm the 40th pastor, and
John Taylor was the first.
And John Taylor was the first, and that can change the instant I do something stupid. Everybody in the congregation can call for a business meeting, and they're going to say, "You're out of there," and they can elect anybody else or whatever, who somebody else they feel is gifted and who was that people are feeling called to exercise that leadership at some point, or whether I won't be pastor anymore. And it comes from, therefore, what we say in Canada, what we call
so you're 70
government.
And pastor. That's interesting that you have both callings.
So 70 is a priesthood office.
Okay.
And pastor is it's like being branch president.
Right.
So I think branch president isn't like a priesthood office. It's like a calling or something, right? And so that's what I would call it.
Okay.
So yeah, it's priesthood office of 70, and then I'm the pastor of the congregation.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Community of Christ historian John Hamer. In our next conversation, I was really surprised when the Community of Christ dissolved the first presidency. Were they excommunicating Sidney Rigdon too?
So at a certain moment, and this happened just 2 or 3 months ago, when Steve ended up, in other words, when he retired,
mm-hmm.
he had announced his retirement 2 years ahead of time, and he retired at our last World Conference.
Right.
And so at a certain moment in the World Conference, he retired, and the first presidency did dissolve when they retired.
I know. And so that was what I was sitting there going, oh my gosh,
yeah,
they're getting rid of Sidney Rigdon. That was my thought when I happened, because I was so surprised that they dissolved the first presidency. Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.